Poole, Dr. Simon Poole. I'm happy to finally get a chance to interview you because I read your book, The Real Mediterranean Diet, and you have a unique perspective as a medical doctor. So on it, so first thing I want to ask you, and perhaps before I say anything, perhaps you can just tell me a little bit about yourself, about your medical background and your profession.
Sure. Well, thank you very much, Ethan. And first of all, thank you very much indeed for inviting me. And it's a privilege to join you today. And I've been looking at all the work you do, which is absolutely remarkable and splendid. So it's a real pleasure to join you today. So yes, as you say, my background is one of a medical doctor. I've been 30 years in practice, frontline clinical medicine, and my interest in the health of the Mediterranean diet, and in particular of extra virgin olive oil, and now in particular in relation to the polyphenolic levels of extra virgin olive oil, it all began, I suppose, about 20 years ago. Right. Before the Mediterranean diet was perhaps as fashionable as it is now, but of course based on a lot of evidence that was accrued really since the 7-country study, but into the 90s and into the 2000s, lots of evidence around the Mediterranean diet. I started to advocate it for my patients, and I found patients, anecdotally of course, but patients coming back feeling so much better, better numbers, better blood pressure, better cholesterol, better weight, and just feeling so tremendous on this fantastic diet. And then I particularly became interested in what the drivers were for the diet, because the Mediterranean diet is so often described in just a few words as vegetables, fruit, and nuts, and olive oil, and then people start to run out of ideas a little bit. And really, it struck me very strongly that the benefits of extra virgin olive oil can be measured by themselves scientifically. That's first. And secondly, that it does seem to be very much down to the polyphenols in extra virgin olive oil. So I became particularly interested, and now I'm very privileged to travel and to consult and to lecture around the Mediterranean diet, in particular extra virgin olive oil.
Wow, that's amazing. That's quite a turn of events, because up until now people have been complaining that doctors don't know about diet, and now we see a lot of doctors getting into different diets, but mostly fad diets. This is the first book that I see, that I read, that has you go into some very highly scientific stuff, but you explain it in a layman's way so everybody can understand it.
Well, thank you. Yes, I mean, I think there are certainly lots of fad diets out there, and as you say, a lot of people are promoting diets which really they have very little scientific evidence behind them, but also they are philosophically, I think, flawed. So that if you focus on single macronutrients like a low carbohydrate diet, what is that about? We eat food. We don't eat carbohydrates. We eat food, and food contains many more ingredients, many more compounds than just carbohydrates. So for me, the macronutrient wars, as I describe, whether it's paleo, whether it's high carb, low carb, high fat, low fat, is all a distraction. And so it's a real pleasure to actually be an ambassador for a diet which is founded on foods, founded on a lot of evidence, and to be able to advocate it, but also to be able to explain it. And my role as a frontline physician is precisely that. So my job as a frontline clinician is to explain potentially complicated medical concepts to patients, to help them understand how better to manage their health. So that's my background. So when I can see some of the quite nuanced and complicated, but at the same time fascinating science of the Mediterranean diet, it's a real pleasure to be able to try and explain that in everyday language, so that people can understand why the science is so relevant and why the science is so exciting.
Right. Now, because let's get back to fad diets, because this is something I'd like to have your opinion on, because I've been reading about the Pritikin diet and them saying a lot of bad things about olive oil. And then I read the studies that they based it on. And apparently, if an olive oil constricts the arteries. But then I read, that's what the Pritikin diet fans talk about. But then I read another study that mixed olive oil and wine. And they found that actually it relaxes the endothelial cells and keeps them elastic for 2 hours after consumption, olive oil and wine together. So what the hypothesis is that the olive oil without the polyphenols may not be as healthy as the one with polyphenols. That means that you can have an olive oil that's not extra virgin even, but as long as you have polyphenols with it, like from wine or from fruit, vegetables, and so forth, it could be very low polyphenol, but you still get the benefit of the olive oil. Is this true?
So I think a simple answer is yes. I think there's absolutely a truth in what you say, and I think what it boils down to is a couple of things about the way in which we view diets and the way in which we view science.
Right.
So the first thing is that it's really easy to measure certain things in a test tube or to isolate particular ingredients and try to prove one thing or another. But the reality is that not only do we not eat macronutrients, we eat food.
Right.
But it's not even as simple as that. We don't just eat food, we eat meals. So when we eat food, it's usually combined, hopefully deliciously, with other foods. And it would be crazy to imagine that these foods don't interact. And indeed that they don't interact with our gut microbiome, and that we don't process them in a quite complicated way. So I think you're absolutely right. We have to look at whole diets. We have to look at not just the ingredients, but we have to look at what compounds are in those ingredients and how they interact and interface with compounds in other ingredients. So I know referencing a study which was fascinating, which showed that consuming an olive oil rich meal with some red wine not only enhanced what we call the bioavailability, that's the availability to our bodies of the potentially beneficial polyphenols, but it also in fact actually created new polyphenols that weren't in the individual ingredients. And that's also true when one cooks with extra virgin olive oil. You get a mix between vegetable polyphenols and the extra virgin olive oil. It changes the bioavailability, and you can see benefits from those kind of combinations. And the Mediterranean diet is, I mean, it's actually not even just a diet, it's a lifestyle, but the Mediterranean lifestyle is all about how you put foods together in a really healthy way, enjoy consuming them. And what we're seeing in that is that those combinations of diets. So I think, the Pritikin diet is promoted on the basis of this kind of assertion about olive oil in complete isolation, for which there is not very much scientific evidence to support anyway, but it's all rather isolationist in the same way that the macronutrient pugilists fight each other over whether fat is good or carbohydrates are bad, or vice versa. And so I think that's very limiting, and we need to look at things like polyphenols and the way they work together in ingredients mixed and potentially cooked together.
Right, fantastic. Yeah, that's really what I get from it, and that's what excites me about living here in Greece, because you have such a variety and such a simple meals. Like I see here, and I've gone to some villages and down in the Peloponnese, and what they do is they gather all the greens in the winter, and then they braid them and they hang them to dry in a dark room, and then have greens all for the whole year.
Yes, and they probably preserve it, and as well in olive oil, in extra virgin olive oil.
Yeah, they make pies with it. They make everything with it. Yeah.
Absolutely, and when I know that Professor Antonia Trikopoulou, based in Athens, and her team spent a long time looking at the components of those wild greens, and really they contain some fascinating compounds, some omega-3s, and also some very unique and individual polyphenols, just in the same way that extra virgin olive oil contains very unique and interesting polyphenols, and so wild greens, that you're describing as part of life. And also, of course, this is why we come back to the lifestyle, because the climbing up the hill, right, to harvest your and to find your wild greens and to forage for them, and the exercise and the under the, you know, the fading setting sun, or at dawn, you know, just as the sun rises because it's too hot later on in the day. All of that is part of the experience and the lifestyle that contributes, I'm sure, to health in some difficult to measure way, but that feels very, very real somehow, doesn't it?
Yes, foraging. That's one of my fondest memories in childhood, is going with my grandmother up the mountain, up the hills, and gathering chamomile, getting big bags of it, bringing it home, drying it out in the backyard on the cement on a sheet, and then having tea all year.
Yes,
just like that.
Yes. From the dried chamomile. That's
yeah.
right. And there is Greek mountain tea, isn't there? Which I think is sideratis, which again, I think there's some research going on in universities in Greece to identify some of the particularly unique compounds in that. So yeah, and that's part of the lifestyle and part of the upbringing. And I think, you know, a lot of people say, well, you're talking about life in Greece, and well, if only I could retire to Greece and sit by my swimming pool and all my stresses were to go away.
That's why I advise people. I tell them, sell everything, come to Greece. That's it.
Well, yes, but I have to counter that, Ethan, because that's a highly prejudiced place to be. But seriously,
I'm a promoter.
Of course, seriously, there's some very real issues around the environment and around how one chooses to live one's life. I think here, those of us rather stuck in the in countries which are perhaps not quite as aspirational as Greece, I think the answer is to try to apply to our lives as much of the Mediterranean lifestyle as we can. So, you know, on an autumn's day, you know, go out and pick some blackberries, and people are foraging. People are looking more for what I suppose we loosely call real food, although that's hard to define. But people try and go to farmers markets. They try and I think increasingly look for foods which represent quality. And I know that because foods are often grown so naturally in the Mediterranean, that quality literally falls off the trees or falls off the bush or just appears in the ground naturally because it's unprocessed, and the way in which foods are grown is often much more true to nature. But people again are looking for that, I think, a little bit more in the West, to try and find foods that are of high quality, that really smell good and that really taste good. And it's fascinating that we know that polyphenols, for example, which are very powerful bioactive compounds, we know that they contribute to taste and smell, which is again really exciting, because I think the quality of food that you're describing, finding naturally on a mountainside, is something that I think we need to try to reproduce here in Northwest Europe and the US, where we're more used to having foods that are perhaps grown in ways that are slightly more intensive.
Yes. Well, you know, I have an interesting story about that. I was in a trade show in Salonika, and an olive grower came up to me and says, listen, you guys, stop pushing the polyphenols going so high. You're going, you know, 1,000, 1,500, 2,000. You can't drink that olive oil. It's impossible. So I turned to him and I said, well, actually, I don't sell it as olive oil. He says, what? Oh, I sell it as hot sauce. I said, yeah. Yeah, you put it on hot sauce. You know, anywhere, steak, you put it on your potatoes, you put it anywhere, you know, it's hot sauce, because it's peppery to the throat and very bitter. And so then when I went home, I researched it, because I was joking, of course, I'm pulling his leg. Then sales of hot sauce in the US and sales of olive oil. Hot sauce is equal to olive oil in total sales.
How interesting.
And then they say that Americans have, you know, like mild foods.
Yes, and it does depend on what you're used to. And of course, there's a famous study which came out of the States which showed that actually people in the US prefer rancid olive oil because that's the flavor that they're used to.
Yes.
And I often, you know, I sometimes, I'm not an olive oil sommelier, but I sometimes do tasting with audiences of olive oil. And I say, you know, we've got to kind of try to understand olive oil, particularly mixed with food, but we've got to try and recognize this bitterness and the pepperiness that you're describing as being a positive feature. And then people sort of slightly are surprised by this, and I say, well, you know, we're talking about bitterness and we're talking about spiciness, and it's a Friday afternoon, and you know, what are your plans? Where are you going to go to eat tonight? And you know, somebody in the audience might say, well, I'm going to go and have a pint of bitter, and then I'm going to go to the Spice Palace for an Indian curry. And I say, well, so you're telling me that you're finding bitterness and spiciness challenging? Well, no, it's okay. You know, you actually, there are circumstances where you enjoy that bitterness and the pungency and the spiciness. And so actually it's about helping people to understand about the benefits of that. And of course, you know, Cajun spices in the States ultimately derive from France, in fact, because the Cajun populations came, I think, down to Louisiana and places like that in the States. From
Arcadia, from Canada, actually,
from Canada, and originally their ancestors had come a few generations before, I understand, from France. Right. So Cajun is actually almost a Mediterranean idea that's brought to the States. So yes, I think it's about helping and understanding people to recognize these different flavors as being really positive attributes. And you know the Mediterranean diet, and one of the aspects of my book is looking at the history of the Mediterranean diet, because of course it was described in modern terms in the 1960s and in medical terms, but actually the Mediterranean diet, of course, is a diet of millennia. And of course, the wonderful stories that go back about the Mediterranean being a real melting pot on the spice route, you know, so we see the history of food evolution as cultures based around olive oil as a fundamental source of nutrition, a fundamental source of fat, a fundamental cooking oil, introducing spices from other parts of the world, introducing garlic from Asia, from India, introducing spices along the spice route from the Far East and so on, all to bring to that Mediterranean diet as it's evolved over the years, and bringing with it, of course, really powerful antioxidant compounds, because gram for gram, spices are very, very rich. Things like cinnamon and other spices are very rich in polyphenolic antioxidants.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's part of a healthy diet. It's they're practically medicinal in nature. And you know, did you know that about this melting pot of the spice roots and so forth in BC? You know, in Sicily in 625 BC, they had cooking contests, and they actually.
I didn't know that. That's fascinating.
They gave the winner of the contest. There was given an exclusive right to make that dish for 1 full year. It was the first instance of a patent. So the chef was given the right to, the only one who could make that meal. That means that during the whole year, if anybody had a banquet and so forth, they would invite this chef to make his meal, and then he would benefit from it. So it's the first instance of a authority giving the right, exclusive right to intellectual property.
That's absolutely fascinating. One of the things I love about these kind of conversations is that I always learn so much.
Yes.
And you know, I reflect on the fact that we often think that we are, you know, we're so advanced in you know in the 21st century, and that somehow these civilizations were so primitive. And the example that you've shown is that actually, you know, they were thinking about these things all the time. And actually I kind of look at this guy Apicius, who was a Roman chef, who wrote effectively recipe books, and by the sounds of descriptions of him at the time, he was a real diva. He was a real problematical character, and so he was a celebrity chef, as we know many of them today. You know, slightly difficult to handle at times, and so on. And so we kind of think, oh well, you know, celebrity chefs are a modern invention. Well, certainly not. You know, they were around in those times, and you know, we can reflect on so much in history, can't we? With these stories, you know, with Pliny the Elder described the various grades of olive oil way
Yes.
before the International Olive Council ever existed. He described, I mean, Pliny the Elder described, based on his perhaps being a governor, we think, in Tunisia,
Right.
growing olive, and he described in his natural history book around the grades, the bitterest, purest olive oil to be first harvested, and then the later oils with lower value for health, and how to do those early harvests. So we think we are. We think that we're modern and we know all these things, but actually, if we look back in history, a lot of it has been very much covered before us.
Yeah, because back then they were doing trial and error, and the whole subject was wide open. I mean,
Yes.
they were looking at mushrooms. They didn't know what kind of mushroom it was, so they had to test it. So some people got sick, and some others didn't. Some felt much better. So with foods, they were very observant because they had to know what the result was. So if you had this meal, if you ate this diet, so even when they traveled, they would look at the people's bodies and say, what do they eat and what do they look like? What's their muscle development? How strong are they? Do they have stamina and so forth and so on? So that's the most fascinating part. And as far as the patent is concerned, I found it by accident. I was looking at patenting and Wikipedia patents, and that's where it comes up. This recipe, it was the first instance of a patent.
Fascinating, isn't it? That is, yes, that is extraordinary.
So, I know, we think, anyway, I could go on about that, but more specifically now. So in relation to olive oil now, which is my passion, my craziness, because I got into it when the first health claim for polyphenols came about for food. I believe it's the only instance that polyphenols were given a health claim as part of a food with olive oil. That's in 2012.
Yes, that's my understanding too.
And
yes.
that really got me interested in the beginning for trade, because I thought, okay, now we know which olive oils have the most Oleocanthal, so then I can go market those olive oils as high in Oleocanthal. But then I got involved in a whole debate how to measure them, what method, and I was a writer at the time, publishing articles for oliveoiltimes.com. And then I got involved, sidetracked into the research and development, and trying to clarify this health claim, because it wasn't the most clear. It was written by epidemiologists. It wasn't written by analytical chemists. So the language was a little obscure, although anybody who knows can certainly know what they're talking about. But it's easy for somebody to say, oh, no, it doesn't mean this, it means this, and create a lot of confusion and problems. Because it is a problem, as I found out, as we found over the last 10 years, that olive oil, early harvest olive oil needs to be protected. Temperature control is very, very important. And it's something that's not mentioned. It says keep in a dry, cool place. What does that mean? 18, 20, 25 degrees? For somebody living in Egypt, maybe 25 degrees is very cool.
Yes, you're exactly right. I mean, I think it illustrates, doesn't it, the fact that this health claim, which for listeners who might not be aware, basically you are allowed with a specific certain level of specific polyphenol compounds, which are antioxidant compounds, you're allowed to make a claim, but you have to adhere to specific wording, which describes the benefit of the extra virgin olive oil in reducing the oxidative stress on LDL cholesterol.
Yes.
And the problem for most consumers is that they have no clue what this
what does that mean?
means, of course. And what you've also alluded to is the fact that actually, what measurements are these based on, and is this at harvest? Is this 3 months after? Is this 6 months after? Right. As those polyphenols potentially are dropping in level. I think, though, what is clear is that oxidative stress on LDL cholesterol is absolutely a contributing factor to heart disease. Mm. So, I mean, I think it is an easy step to say that health claim describes doesn't describe just an abstract effect on LDL cholesterol, because it wouldn't be a health claim if it was simply describing an abstract effect. It must have some consequence on health, otherwise it wouldn't be a health claim.
Yes.
So what is the effect on health? Well, it's reducing inflammation of cholesterol plaques, and therefore it's reducing ultimately your risk of heart disease. But the wording on the claim is obscure to consumers. There is some, I think, possibility of having some hope around that, because there are some flexibility allowances within EFSA guidance to allow you to try and communicate a health claim in a way that is more more overt, but nobody has quite negotiated on a product in store with their local authorities about how to express that flexibility that is allowed within the guidance to ensure that consumers can understand. But at the moment, it seems to me to be a great loss, because here's a health claim that people are beginning to use on label, but consumers don't understand. So actually, consumers are missing out on the potential for having a high polyphenolic extra virgin olive oil to benefit their health. And let's face it, EFSA's job in producing health claims ought to be, firstly, to limit unevidenced claims.
Right.
But secondly, when they do allow a claim, it actually ought to be to ensure consumers can actually benefit from that.
Yes.
And so I think that those of us who have a little bit of understanding about what that means in terms of health, actually, I think we have a role to try to help understanding about what the effect is of polyphenols. And another interesting aspect is that oxidative stress on LDL cholesterol is part of the claim, but EFSA have been very unhappy about using the words antioxidant, because antioxidants have been used by often by supplement producers who have to adhere to different legal frameworks. It's often used, and has, I think, been previously used by in the food industry in an extremely loose way, which hasn't helped. But yet at the same time, the effects of the polyphenols are not only anti-inflammatory, but there clearly is an antioxidant effect, because reducing the oxidative stress on LDL cholesterol in anybody's head must be antioxidant. And yet one is not allowed to say that high polyphenol extra virgin olive oil has an antioxidant effect on label.
Leave it to the bureaucrats. Leave it to the bureaucrats.
Right. So it's a strange world we find ourselves in. And I suppose, although we have this health claim, I suppose what a lot of us are really interested in is explaining to consumers and the public that if we have polyphenols, and not just hydroxytyrosol and tyrosol, which are the two named polyphenols in this particular health claim, which was incidentally based on one or two particular pieces of research from Maria Covas in Spain. But what we need to explain is the fact that it's overall levels of polyphenols, that there are different polyphenols, there's oleocanthal, that they have anti-inflammatory effects as well as having effects on reducing oxidative stress on LDL cholesterol. They actually have more widespread anti-inflammatory effects, and try to help people understand that this affects the taste and the experience around the extra virgin olive oil, and how to look after oil to preserve it, as you've so rightly said.
Yeah, and that's what I like about your book, Simon, that you identify that the way you combine these foods also increase the polyphenol absorption. Like, for example, like you mentioned earlier, just to remind people, is that when you combine olive oil and wine, studies have shown that it may increase the polyphenol absorption up to twice as much if they were on their own, from the polyphenols from the wine and from the olive oil as well. So perhaps you don't even need the minimum amount of 250 milligrams per kilogram that's in the health claim, maybe only 125. If you have it with wine, it doubles them, so you get to 250.
Exactly, yes. And all these things are really up for debate. And I think it's really important that we acknowledge that there are areas of uncertainty. I think it's really important that I want to be faithful to this in my book, which is to say there are certain things we understand. You know, there are the known knowns,
Yeah.
but there are also the unknown knowns,
Yes.
and then the unknown unknowns,
Yeah,
because
no.
because actually, you know, and we have to respect the science that these polyphenols, they are slightly mysterious. You know, we consume them in our foods, and they're variable in our foods, and the way we combine them with our foods changes them. Then our gut microbiome changes them as well, and then they get absorbed. We actually find it, I mean, scientists find it really difficult to see how they act in terms, and there's even some theories that perhaps antioxidants combining together, polyphenols, recharge themselves actually at a cellular level in terms of their antioxidant capacity. So there's a lot that's really, really sort of highbrow science, and a lot that we don't understand. And some polyphenols completely mysteriously disappear after they've hit our gut microbiomes, and then they reappear in our urine. But try as we might to measure them in our cells or in our blood, we can't. But at the same time, I think even though we know that our level of understanding is fairly primitive, and that we've got a lot to learn, I think it's so important that we say, okay, but we do know that there are certain really fundamental things going on with polyphenols which benefit health. So when I speak to some of these scientists for whom I have the most, utmost respect, they would say, well, you know, we can't say this, we can't say that because we're not certain, we don't have the evidence. And I attend conferences about bioactives and about polyphenols. I'm attending one in Parma in June. And you know, scientists get together and they often argue with each other about the minutiae of their, you know, of their scientific technique and their methodology, and often there's a slightly competitive edge. And so they're kind of looking at their science with extraordinary, sometimes self-effacing, and sometimes actually in a combative way of other scientists, trying to kind of reduce their work down and perhaps potentially diminish their work. Actually, what we should be saying is, look, we know this, and this is really potentially important. This is really potentially positive, and it's pretty obvious, isn't it, that, you know, so we know the Mediterranean diet is healthy for us. We know that extra virgin olive oil has always been a fundamental part of that. Well, although actually maybe not extra virgin olive oil, because maybe a lot of the oil that was consumed in previous generations wasn't necessarily as high grade extra virgin as it is now. But perhaps that's because it was, you know, the combination of foods as you've described.
Right. Yeah.
But we also know that polyphenols are really important in that context. We know that polyphenols have some bioactive, some bioactivity, which is really, really important for health. So let's get that message across, and then try, and then look for papers that help us to understand the mechanisms.
Right, because, you know, I don't know if you saw the latest research that Dr. Magatis and Dr. Lenny Mellu and Amal Kadumi, I believe, in the States, where they discovered what happens in the body. The Oleocanthal actually changes into something else. And then when it goes to the brain, it changes into something else because it interacts with the amino acids, which is fascinating. It's like...
It is. And that cutting edge research is so important to help us to understand what's happening on a physiological and a cellular level. And so I think, you know, there's very exciting science going on around this, but at the same time, we also need to get these messages out in a very, very understandable and comprehensible way to the general public.
I think this is the way to do it. I think this is backwards of the real Mediterranean diet. A practical guide to understanding and achieving the healthiest diet in the world by Dr. Simon Poole. Really, what you did in this book is exactly everything you're discussing right now. And for me, it's very valuable because it brings to focus the combination that you can get polyphenols from very different sources, not just one. You can't just buy the highest polyphenol olive oil and have that, and then go out and have French fries and burgers and fast food and think that's your medicine or that's going to do something positive. It may, but there's some other, getting it from a wide variety of sources. Not only you get more of them, but also they interact with each other in ways that makes them more beneficial.
I think that's exactly right. And if we can get over these debates about carbs and proteins, and then we can actually talk about food, and then we can talk about these really interesting concepts of the polyphenols, these bioactive compounds. So, you know, the Mediterranean diet has got the right combination of carbohydrates, low GI whole grain carbs. It's got great proteins, often from fish or even plant proteins from beans. It's got, you know, it's got really healthy fats, great sources of vitamins, minerals, because the soil is often really healthy soil in traditional Mediterranean countries. So great vitamins, minerals, but then we also nail it down to these bioactive compounds, right, the carotenoids, and the polyphenols, and the potential for antioxidant effects. And I think that's why, for me, the Mediterranean diet is such a great thing, great way to eat, and a great topic to discuss, because it doesn't just limit our nutritional discussion. We can discuss all of these actually much more exciting so-called minor compounds, but actually these compounds that have a real effect, not only on pleasure in terms of what we eat, because actually they have different taste sensations, but also in terms of their bioactivity and their potential to be beneficial to health.
Exactly. I want to ask you, are you coming this summer to the Olympia Health Awards in Athens, May 15th?
So I am, what date is it again?
May 15th. May 15th.
I think I'm probably not going to get there this summer, but I'd love to. And I know I have very fond memories of coming to the old Parliament in pre-pandemic, which was a wonderful experience, not least because, you know, you bring the producers.
Yes.
And, you know, so we talk about communicating to the public, you know, and when we talk about communicating the consumers, but the great things that you're doing in that context is also having this dialogue and this debate with the producers. And the producers are really smart people, and really now are beginning to understand how they can use understanding of polyphenols to nurture their products and to make really high quality, really healthy. So it's wonderful to see those interactions with farmers, you know, who and producers who come to those awards, and you know, you can engage and discuss with them. So part of my the people I talk to, you know, I talk to consumers and hopefully communicate through my book. But I also spend a lot of my time talking to food manufacturers, but also to producers, and often having these discussions about how they're producing the olive oil. And I might, in some instances, contribute, I hope, to them producing better extra virgin olive oil. But I always learn much more from them when they're telling me about how, you know, what's happening in their grove, and how they're managing that, and so again, it's important to have these discussions the whole way through, from literally from farm to fork, or in this case, from soil to spoon.
Yes.
It's actually having those conversations.
Yeah, exactly. Because I asked you because on the 14th, the day before, we're having the Aristoleo Awards here on Aegean Island. So we're having a feast of ancient Hellenic recipes, and also ancient Hellenic instruments playing modern and ancient songs. And then we'll have also the awards. It'll be a huge party.
How wonderful. Well, as I can't make it, I hope you take some videos, and I hope
for sure. On
your site, and so that we can all enjoy those.
It'll be well documented,
at least from afar.
Yes, because last time we did it in 2019, and it was an impromptu dance that happened. Somebody put music on in the restaurant. All it was the scientists with the producers, olive oil producers, and the other producers there, making the different grains, ancient Greek grains, and chefs. They all start dancing. It was a beautiful thing to see. It was just wonderful.
I'm having the image in my mind at the moment.
I'll send you the video. I have the video of that.
I would love that, and I would love to see your dancing as well, Nathan.
Yes, well, I did. I may do it again.
Absolutely.
In 2019, I did get up for it.
Excellent. I expect that was something very magical to watch, I think.
Yes, and Dan Flynn took that amazing photograph when I was in the air. I looked like a dancer, you know, I looked like
Fantastic.
a moment in time. Yes, that was fantastic. Anyway, it's been a pleasure talking to you, Simon. And I'm going to talk about this book a lot, and I wish you all the success. And I think this is really it. I think you've really hit the nail on the head, as they say, with the Mediterranean diet, especially the part where you don't need big portions, small portions.
Well, yeah, well, thank you, Ethan. It's been a real privilege to talk to you, and thank you for everything you're doing, and thank you for your support. And you know, I think whenever I talk to people interested in the Mediterranean diet and passionate about extra virgin olive oil, you know, we're all working to as ambassadors to really spread the word to get what we understand and know intuitively to be about having a happy and healthy and hopefully long and enjoyable life. You know, we're all wanting that to get that message out and impart that in a way that helps others, I think. Yes.
Well, you're a big part of it, especially being a doctor and somebody who's took a keen interest in diet as part of the doctor's advice to his patients. And that's really cool. Thank you.
Lovely to talk.
Okay. Take care.
Thank you. You too. Bye.